In a quiet corner of rural Vermont, nestled among the hills, there was a small rescue shelter known as Willow Creek Animal Shelter. The shelter was home to many dogs and cats in need of love, care, and a second chance. But there was one dog who stood apart from the rest. His name was Max, and he was a German shepherd who had been brought to the shelter 8 months ago. Unlike the other dogs who wagged their tails or barked happily when people walked by, Max had become a symbol of fear and sadness. His cage had a sign on it that read, "Do not approach." The staff had learned the hard way not to get too close. Max wasn't always this way. When he had first arrived at Willow Creek, no one knew exactly what had happened to him. All they knew was that he had been found chained to a fence on an abandoned farm. His ribs showed clearly beneath his dirty, patchy fur, and his eyes seemed empty, as though something deep inside him had been lost forever. He didn't bark for attention, and he didn't seek affection. Instead, Max growled, snarled, and bared his teeth at anyone who came near, especially men. The volunteers and staff learned quickly to keep their distance, whispering to one another about the dog who had become more of a warning sign than a resident. Max's behavior made him an outcast even among the other animals. His growls echoed through the shelter, a constant reminder of the trauma he had endured. While the other dogs wagged their tails and begged for treats, Max remained still, always watching with a guarded, fearful gaze. Every time someone came too close, he would lunge at the bars of his cage, sending a chill down their spines. There was no sign of the playful puppy he might have once been, only a scared and broken dog who didn't trust anyone. In the months that followed, the shelter tried everything to help Max. They brought in trainers, behaviorists, and even tried medication, but nothing worked. He refused to let anyone get close, and his aggression only seemed to grow with time. The staff began to talk in hushed voices whenever they mentioned his name. "He's beyond help," one staff member said, shaking her head. "There's no way he can be adopted." Max's case had become the subject of whispered conversations and debates among the shelter workers. Some believed he would never be able to live in a home, while others feared he would become a permanent resident, never finding the peace he so desperately needed. But that all changed one quiet morning when Dr. Olivia Carter walked through the shelter doors. She wasn't looking for a dog. She was a trauma therapist, specializing in helping people recover from emotional and psychological scars. It was a career that had taught her the importance of patience, understanding, and listening. She had spent years working with people, helping them rebuild their lives. But when she stepped into Willow Creek with her 10-year-old daughter, Sarah, her life was about to change forever, and so was Max. Dr. Olivia was no stranger to healing. She had worked with children, families, and individuals who had been through unspeakable trauma. But she had never worked with a dog quite like Max. As she walked past his cage, her eyes met his. For a moment, nothing happened. The growls and snarls that had defined Max's interactions with others were absent. He simply stared at her, his eyes filled with a deep, fearful sadness. It wasn't anger. It wasn't aggression. It was something deeper, something much more painful. Fear. Dr. Olivia stopped in her tracks, not sure what to make of the dog's gaze. Sarah, who had always loved animals, stood quietly beside her mother. Olivia gently placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder as they both looked in at Max. The shelter staff had warned them to stay away, but Olivia felt a pull, an unspoken connection. "What happened to him?" she asked softly, her voice filled with curiosity and concern. The shelter manager, Linda, who had seen more than her fair share of difficult animals, sighed heavily. "He was found on an abandoned farm. No food, no shelter. We think he was used for guard work, trained to intimidate. He's never bitten anyone, but he's come close, especially with men." As Linda spoke, a male volunteer walked past the cage, and in an instant, Max sprang to his feet, his body tense, his teeth bared. He lunged at the bars, his growl deep and primal. Linda flinched, taking a step back. Olivia, however, didn't flinch. She watched Max closely, her eyes softened with understanding. She could see that there was more to this dog than anger. There was pain. Deep, unresolved pain that had caused him to build walls so high that even kindness couldn't reach him. "May I sit here?" Olivia asked, motioning to the floor in front of Max's cage. Linda hesitated but nodded. "He won't come near you." "That's okay," Olivia said, her voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to ask anything of him." She sat cross-legged on the floor, placing her hands in her lap. Sarah crouched beside her, her eyes wide with curiosity as she watched her mother. Sarah had always been drawn to animals, and now she was witnessing something special, the beginning of an unlikely connection between a broken dog and a woman who understood pain. Olivia pulled out a book from her bag and began to read softly. It wasn't for Max, not yet. It was for herself and Sarah, and for the dog who was watching them closely from the safety of his cage. He was still fearful, still cautious, but there was a shift in the air. Something had begun to change. The next day, Dr. Olivia Carter and Sarah returned to the shelter. They weren't expecting Max to be any different, but something inside Olivia had shifted. She wasn't giving up on him. Not yet. As they passed Max's cage again, Sarah looked at her mother and whispered, "I think he could be different, Mom. I think he just needs a chance." Dr. Olivia smiled at her daughter, a spark of hope flickering in her heart. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe, just maybe, Max had a chance. The days that followed Max's first encounter with Dr. Olivia and Sarah were not filled with dramatic change. Instead, they were quiet and uneventful, a time of slow, steady progress. Dr. Olivia came back to the shelter each day, bringing Sarah along whenever she could. Sarah, with her natural affinity for animals, never wavered in her belief that Max was just a dog in need of love and patience. She would sit by his cage for hours, watching him, her eyes full of understanding. She didn't see the snarling, aggressive dog that the others did. She saw the scared soul underneath, and that made all the difference. Olivia, too, was committed. As a trauma therapist, she knew that healing didn't happen overnight. She had worked with humans who carried deep scars, both seen and unseen, and she understood that the road to recovery was long, sometimes painful, but always worth the effort. She had hoped that by coming back every day, she could create a sense of routine and trust with Max, even if he didn't show it right away. Trust wasn't something Max was ready to give yet, but Olivia believed it could happen. On the fourth day of their visits, Olivia noticed something different. Max was watching them from his cage. But this time, his eyes weren't filled with immediate suspicion. There was still fear, yes, but it was no longer as sharp. It was more like the fear of the unknown, the fear of what could happen if he allowed himself to trust again. Olivia could feel his hesitation, but she also felt the pull, a glimmer of hope that maybe he was starting to understand they weren't like the others who had hurt him. "Maybe we're getting somewhere," Olivia said quietly to Sarah as they sat in front of Max's cage. "I can see him starting to watch us differently." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the dog. "He's not growling. He's just watching, like he's trying to figure us out." Olivia smiled at her daughter. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. "You're right," she said. "It's a good sign. He's learning to trust." Over the next few weeks, this delicate dance continued. Olivia would come every day, and Sarah would bring her sketchpad. The pair would sit by Max's cage, quietly observing him, letting him get used to their presence. They never rushed him, never forced any interaction. And slowly, the atmosphere around Max began to change. One morning, while Sarah was drawing quietly, Olivia turned to the shelter manager, Linda. "Do you think he'll ever be ready for adoption?" she asked, her voice soft, but full of concern. Linda sighed, looking at Max's cage. "It's hard to say. We've seen no progress with him. Not like this. He's been here for months, and no one's been able to reach him. He's never let anyone close. But maybe there's something in what you're doing. I don't know." Olivia's heart lifted at the words, but she didn't let herself get too hopeful. She knew better than anyone that change was slow, and it took time. But she felt a shift within Max, something that made her believe there was a chance, however small. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. As the days passed, Max began to show signs of progress. Though they were subtle, he still wouldn't eat in front of anyone, but he had stopped growling. He would watch them with intense eyes, his body stiff with wariness, but not aggression. Occasionally, he would shift a little, perhaps a sign that he was feeling a bit more comfortable. The longer he was around Olivia and Sarah, the more he seemed to soften. But they knew the road ahead would not be without its bumps. One afternoon, as they sat near his cage, Sarah looked at Olivia with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think he knows we're here to help him?" Olivia glanced at Max, who was lying on his side, his ears perked, watching them from his spot in the corner of the cage. "I think he's starting to understand that we won't hurt him," she said. "But it's not just about that. He has to learn to trust again. And trust is something that's hard for him right now." Sarah nodded, and after a moment, she whispered, "He can trust us. He just has to see it for himself." Olivia smiled at her daughter's insight. "You're right. Trust takes time, and we're willing to give him that time." As the weeks went on, Dr. Olivia and Sarah continued their visits, always patient, always present. It became clear to everyone who observed them that the bond between Max and Sarah was growing. Sarah, with her quiet kindness and natural understanding, was able to connect with Max in a way no one else had been able to. She didn't demand anything from him. She simply sat there with him, sharing her calm energy and allowing him the space to make his own decisions. One day, after nearly a month of visiting the shelter, Olivia and Sarah sat on the floor in front of Max's cage as usual. Sarah had brought her sketchpad again and was drawing pictures of dogs. She looked up from her pad, her eyes shining with hope. "Mom," she said softly, "I think he could be different. I think he just needs someone to believe in him." Olivia looked at her daughter, her heart full of pride. "I think you're right," she said quietly. "He needs someone to believe in him, and I'm starting to believe in him too." That afternoon, after another quiet visit, Olivia and Sarah left the shelter with a renewed sense of purpose. They had come so far with Max, and they both knew in their hearts that they couldn't give up on him. But it wasn't just about adopting a dog. It was about helping Max heal, showing him that not all humans were to be feared, and most importantly, helping him rebuild trust in himself and the world around him. The journey was far from over, but it had begun, and that, in itself, was a victory. The days after their visit to the shelter felt like a new chapter in Max's life. Olivia and Sarah continued their routine, coming to the shelter every afternoon without fail. The staff, especially Linda, had begun to notice the change in Max. Where once there had been constant growling, tension, and mistrust, now there was quiet curiosity. Max still wasn't ready to fully trust anyone, but he had started to let down some of his walls, and that was a significant improvement. One afternoon, Olivia sat quietly by Max's cage, reading her book as usual. Sarah sat beside her, sketching quietly in her pad, occasionally glancing over at Max. They were giving him the space he needed to come to them on his own terms. It had been a month since they first started coming to the shelter, and while there was still much progress to be made, Olivia could see the small signs that the dog was slowly starting to trust. She would see him glance at them with less fear, with a faint glimmer of interest. Max would still retreat to the corner of his cage whenever a stranger walked by, but now he no longer lunged or bared his teeth. His body was still tense, but there was no longer the frantic panic that once consumed him. Olivia could feel that, in his own way, Max was beginning to process what had been happening to him. He was starting to realize that maybe not everyone in the world was out to hurt him. "I think he's getting used to us," Sarah whispered one day, looking up from her drawing. "I can tell. He watches us now, but not like before." Olivia nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. "Yes, sweetheart, you're right. He's starting to trust us in his own way. It's going to take time, but every little step forward is progress. That evening, as they walked back to their car, Sarah looked up at Olivia with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think he'll come home with us? Do you think he could be part of our family?" Olivia smiled softly, brushing Sarah's hair from her face. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. It's too soon to say. But I promise you this, we're not giving up on him. Whatever happens, we'll keep helping him, every step of the way." Back at the shelter, things were becoming more complicated. While Max's behavior had improved, there were still those who weren't sure if he was ready for adoption. Dr. Morgan, the shelter's head veterinarian, had expressed concerns about Max's unpredictability. "He's still too unstable. He's made some progress, but we can't risk putting him into a home with children just yet. We don't know what he might do in a stressful situation," Dr. Morgan argued during a meeting with the shelter's board. Olivia, who had attended the meeting, remained calm. "I understand your concerns, Dr. Morgan, but I'm telling you, Max isn't aggressive by nature. He's scared. His behavior comes from fear, not aggression. He needs consistency, love, and time. If you give him that, he'll change." "I know it." The board remained divided, some members hesitant to approve Max's adoption, while others believed Olivia's experience with trauma recovery would make her a good candidate. It was a tense situation, and Olivia knew that convincing the board would not be easy. Still, she was determined to give Max the best chance possible, no matter how difficult the process might be. Olivia and Sarah continued their visits, though, and with each passing day, Max grew just a little bit more comfortable. One afternoon, after a particularly long visit, Olivia decided to take the next step. "It's time," she said, looking down at Sarah with a determined look. "We're taking Max home." Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really, Mom? Really?" Olivia smiled, her heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. It's time to give him a chance. But remember, it's going to take time for him to adjust. We have to be patient." The shelter staff helped Olivia and Sarah load Max into the car, though it took a little longer than expected. Max was hesitant, still unsure about leaving the only place he had known for the past 8 months. He paced back and forth, growling softly, clearly nervous about what was coming next. But Olivia, with her calming presence, didn't force him. She waited, and after several minutes, Max finally climbed into the back of the car on his own. As they made their way home, Olivia couldn't help but look at Sarah, who was sitting quietly in the front seat, her eyes fixed on Max through the rearview mirror. "We're really doing this, aren't we, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Olivia nodded, smiling. "Yes, sweetheart. We're doing this. Together." The ride home was quiet. Max was tense, his body stiff and alert. Olivia kept her hands on the steering wheel, her mind focused on the journey ahead. They were bringing a dog into their home who had been through unimaginable pain and fear, but they were also bringing a dog who had shown the first glimmers of trust. Max wasn't ready to let go of his past, but Olivia and Sarah were ready to help him do just that. When they arrived at their farmhouse, it was already getting dark. Olivia exited the car first, leaving the doors open for Max. She wanted him to feel that he had control over this step. Slowly, with a hesitant look back at the house, Max stepped out of the car. His body was tense, and his tail was low, but he didn't run. He walked slowly toward the house, with Olivia and Sarah trailing behind him at a safe distance. Inside the house, Olivia had already prepared a safe space for Max. It was a quiet corner with a soft bed, a crate without a door, and plenty of room for him to move around without feeling trapped. She had set up the space with the intention of helping Max feel safe, not forced. She wanted him to know that he could take his time and come to them when he was ready. Max entered the house slowly, keeping his distance from Olivia and Sarah, but there was something different about him now. He wasn't running away, he wasn't growling. He was simply there. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. He was home. As he settled into his new space, Sarah looked over at Olivia, her eyes filled with hope. "He's here, Mom. He's really here." Olivia smiled, brushing Sarah's hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. He's home. And we'll help him heal, step by step." The healing had just begun, but Olivia knew that they were on the right path. And Max, though still cautious, had taken the first step toward his new life. The weeks that followed Max's arrival at their farmhouse were a testament to patience, understanding, and the quiet power of trust. Max, the dog who had once been a ferocious ball of fear and aggression, was now starting to show subtle signs of progress. Olivia and Sarah continued their daily routine, always mindful of the emotional space Max needed to heal. They didn't rush him, never pressured him into situations he wasn't ready for. Instead, they let him dictate the pace, respecting his boundaries while gently encouraging him to take small steps forward. Max spent his days in his safe corner, a quiet space at the back of the living room, where he could observe without feeling trapped. Olivia had placed a soft bed and a few toys for him to interact with, but Max didn't show much interest in either. Instead, he sat quietly, his large eyes scanning the room, as if he was trying to make sense of this new world. He wasn't growling anymore, but he wasn't exactly relaxed either. His body remained stiff, tense from a lifetime of watching out for danger. Sarah, ever the optimist, never stopped believing in him. She would sit by his side, sketching pictures in her pad, and softly talking to him. She never expected a response, but just having her near seemed to comfort Max. Every now and then, she would lean forward and whisper, "It's okay, Max. We're not going anywhere." Olivia, too, spoke to him often, though her words were softer and more thoughtful. She would read aloud to him, even though he never responded. She did it because she believed that Max needed to hear calm, reassuring voices. In her mind, the sound of their voices was just as important as the space they were giving him. Slowly, over time, the house began to feel less like a house and more like a home for Max. One afternoon, as Sarah was sitting near Max, reading him a story, she noticed something. It wasn't a big change, but it was a change nonetheless. Max was no longer huddled in the corner of the room. Instead, he was sitting a few feet closer to Sarah, watching her with a level of curiosity she had never seen before. His tail, which had been low and still, gave a faint wag. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't say anything. She just kept reading, her voice gentle and steady. Olivia, who had been quietly observing from the kitchen, smiled to herself. It was a small moment, but it was a victory. For Max, moving closer to Sarah was a step toward healing, and for Sarah, it was a sign that the bond they were forming was strong enough to reach past the barriers Max had built. That evening, Olivia decided it was time to take another step. Max had been in their home for nearly 2 weeks now, and while he wasn't fully comfortable yet, he had made progress. Olivia knew that it was important to keep pushing the boundaries gently, to give Max more chances to adjust to this new life. So she decided to introduce him to the backyard, where they could start to build more trust in a more open space. When she opened the door to the backyard, Max hesitated. He sniffed the air, his body taut with uncertainty. But Olivia didn't push him. She simply stood at the door, waiting. Sarah, too, waited patiently, standing a few feet behind her mother. They both watched as Max slowly approached the door, sniffing the ground with cautious curiosity. After a few moments, he stepped outside, his body tense but not fleeing. Olivia and Sarah followed him, keeping their distance but staying close enough to offer him reassurance. The backyard was quiet, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn. Max moved slowly, his head low, ears flicking at every small sound. Olivia watched him closely, her heart in her throat. She knew how important this moment was, how much it meant for Max to step outside of his familiar, fearful world and explore a new one. As Max walked cautiously around the yard, Olivia turned to Sarah, her voice barely a whisper. "He's doing it, sweetheart. He's trusting us." Sarah's face lit up with a smile, her eyes filled with hope. "I knew he could do it, Mom. I knew it." For the rest of the afternoon, Max explored the backyard at his own pace. He would stop every now and then to sniff the air or watch a bird flit by, his eyes always scanning his surroundings. But there was no growling, no snapping, no sign of aggression. There was only curiosity, and for the first time, a hint of relaxation in his body. Later that evening, as they all sat together on the porch, Sarah looked at Olivia, her voice filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. "Do you think Max is finally starting to feel safe here?" Olivia nodded, her hand resting gently on Sarah's. "I think he's starting to understand that we're not like the people he's known before. And that's the first step. The next part is learning to trust himself too. He has to believe that he deserves this peace." The days that followed were filled with small moments of progress. Max no longer stayed locked in his corner all day. He started to venture closer to Olivia and Sarah, though always at his own pace. He would sometimes curl up at their feet as they sat on the couch, and occasionally he would rest his head on Olivia's lap, just for a moment, before moving back to his safe space. Each of these small steps was a victory. Each one proved that healing, though slow, was happening. One evening, a few weeks later, as Sarah was reading aloud to Max, something incredible happened. Max, who had never allowed anyone to touch him without flinching, leaned forward. His large head nudged Sarah's hand, gently asking for her attention. Sarah froze for a moment. Then slowly and cautiously, she placed her hand on Max's head. Max didn't pull away. He didn't growl. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his body relaxed for the first time. Olivia, who had been watching from the kitchen, felt tears welling in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Max wasn't just healing physically, he was healing emotionally. He was learning to trust, and more importantly, he was learning that he was safe. For the first time in months, Max had found peace, not through force or dominance, but through the patient love and understanding of a family who was willing to see him for who he truly was, a dog who needed to be loved, a dog who needed to be seen. And in that moment, as Sarah gently stroked his fur, Max knew he had found his forever home.